Welcome to Brutally Anna, a podcast about finding love, losing love, and all the things we think about but don't talk about enough. I'm your host, Anna Kai, aka maybe both across social media, here to remind you that life can be beautiful even when it's freaking brutal. So if cats live 9 lives, then my guest today might have been one in her previous life, from her career as a magazine editor to getting hit by a car to influencing and becoming a brand owner herself. Lindsay Silberman's life has taken many twists and sometimes unfortunate turns. Lindsay, I don't know how many lives you have left in you, but I'm glad you're spending a portion of this one with me here today. And I'm so excited to talk to you about how you've probably never been bored in your freaking life.
No, I don't think so. That was, by the way, the best intro that has ever been written about me. And I would like to hand that over to all other podcasts I'm ever on going forward. A 10 out of 10.
I know are you a cat? I know you're a dog person, long hair Pierre.
Not a cat person.
I'm not a cat person either, but you were probably.
I didn't mind the reference though.
I know. I was like, interesting because I was like doing a deep dive on you. I was like, what in God's name has this girl done with her life in so many ways? Okay, so I want to start off. You spent 10 years working as an editor, and you were like, I think you said on a podcast, you're like, I am just going to spend post-grad working my ass off, climbing the corporate ladder, and I'm going to be an editor-in-chief one day, which is great. I love how focused you were in your 20s. And you were about 2 steps away from that dream job when you were like, I'm going to quit and try out this thing that I've never made a cent in. And I think what's so interesting is that I always think that our dreams can change as we age, and you're a perfect example of that. At what stage did you realize maybe being the next Miranda Priestley is not what I want to do with the rest of my life?
I think, the tides started to change a little bit in the magazine industry. I think that kind of idea of this glossy magazine and the Miranda Priestley editor-in-chief sort of shifted when websites happened and the digital age happened. And, I still did up until, honestly, right when I left, kind of envision myself in that editor-in-chief role. But I also think social media happened, Instagram happened, and suddenly a lot of how I envisioned my life looked a lot different, because the dream that I had when I was, let's say, 14 years old, obviously I didn't know anything about like what the world would become, or that my job now did not exist when I was 15 and just getting started, and was just like a little hustler wanting to work her way up the food chain in New York. So yeah, it's just, I think a lot has shifted in the industry, and my job move was sort of a reflection of that.
Does your job still exist?
Oh, yeah. I mean, for sure. It's funny enough, I just came from a breakfast with lots of editors, many of whom I used to work with. And it's so interesting now. I feel like I'm on the other side, and people are very intrigued by what it's like to not be in that world anymore. And yeah, it's just, it's very freeing, I have to say. Like I look back fondly on all of my time that I spent in magazines, because like, wow, the memories, the crazy shit that I like lived and did and got to do, I wouldn't change it for anything, but I'm really happy with the decision that I made.
When you say freeing, what do you mean? Like, you're not having somebody telling you what you can and can't include in a piece, because you used to write a lot, and you still do, but you more so edit for yourself now.
Yeah, I also just think the financial freedom too. I spent my whole life, working in a corporate job with a salary, and I felt very, I hit a ceiling. I felt like I could work so hard, I could bust my ass, and I still wasn't really able to make that much money. And so now, thankfully, I have the independence to kind of be more in control of that, and that part is freeing for me, for sure.
That's great. Who was your first brand partnership? Do you remember? And like, what were your deliverables?
It was Codalee.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
That's wild. So, literally your first was Christine working there? Okay, so Lindsay and I, we actually met at a Codalee event in Brooklyn, and then we just spent a week together in France with Codalee.
Yeah. So they were my first brand partner. Like, just to give a bit more background. So I worked in magazines my entire life. It's all that I ever dreamt of doing. I like you said, I thought that I would just work my way up, become an editor-in-chief. I knew that I was a really hard worker, really determined, really ambitious. I also I'm not so sure that I want kids. And so I also thought, well,
more on that later.
More on that later. But I kind of thought, well, I guess when other people leave to go have kids, maybe then that'll be my opportunity to stick around and like, rise in the ranks. So I started to post on Instagram in the same year. I don't know, what was it, 2015, 2016, kind of when everyone else did. And my account started to grow, and I started to see opportunity with brands reaching out to me and wanting to work together. And at the time, it was very taboo because I was working in this corporate job. You were not allowed to do any sort of take any money or outside deals from other partners. And eventually, I just kind of felt like, I remember someone said to me, the train is leaving the station and you either get on or you're going to miss it. And that was in reference to the world of being a content creator. So I thought, well, I better fucking get on that train. Sorry, can I curse?
Yeah, totally.
Okay. I better get on that train, and I could always go back to a corporate job if it doesn't work out or it's not for me. But I just felt like there was something happening in the social media marketing space, and I felt like I was in a really prime position, and I had such a unique perspective because I had come from a world as an editor and a journalist, and so I decided to just take the leap and got on the train.
I think that's amazing because you leveraged your relationships that you had made in 10 years as an editor. And basically, I'm sure, what were those initial pitches like? I mean, were they basically like, hey, it's the same thing? It's just instead of pitching to, what was your last job?
Town and Country.
Okay, instead of Town and Country, it's just Lindsay Silberman.
Yeah, and I had a real identity crisis with that because for my entire life, I was defined by the magazine I worked at. So it was like Lindsay, who works for Du Jour magazine, Lindsay, who writes for Vogue or writes for the Wall Street Journal. And I was really tethered to that as being like my worth, being kind of put in the publication that I worked for. And so that actually was the scariest part, not having the crutch of a very credible publication. I was like, well, will anyone care about me if I'm just like Lindsay, the person, not associated?
The legitimacy. Because it's like, because like back then, blogging was still sort of, and you started off with a true blog. I mean, you still have your blog, lindsaysilberman.com. Yeah. And blogging was in its infancy. So it's this idea that there's nothing quite, and I think there's still nothing quite like being associated with a Vogue or a Town and Country. I think that gives you such credibility.
People, when I kind of announced that I was leaving, there really had not been a lot of editors who had left to go be content creators at the time. And I literally felt like I could feel people rolling their eyes. I remember sending out an email and knowing that people were talking and knowing that people were like, "Oh my God, did you hear? She's leaving to try to become an influencer." Like as if it was a joke.
High up.
Yeah. And I was like, honestly, a little embarrassed, but I knew deep down, I was like, oh, these people are all going to be wanting to do what I'm doing, but they're going to do it a year later, 2 years later. And I also knew like, I knew that there was some opportunity for me, and I kind of just like sucked it up, and I knew people were talking shit, and I knew it was not thought of as like the most like respected career. People were like, "Oh my gosh, you're leaving this esteemed publication to go do what?" And I just had to kind of own it, And now I'm kind of like, it was the best thing I ever. Yeah. Now I'm like, thank God. And all those people who doubted or rolled their eyes, like, I'm kind of had the last laugh, I feel.
I mean, it's incredible what you've built. And I think that's such an important note because when I look at, now I know you obviously, but when I looked at your resume kind of before I got to know you, I was like, this girl has never fucked up in her entire life. First of all, not many people graduate college with a clear focus of what they want to do, which I think is really interesting because you went to Syracuse and you were like, what was the title of your major? It was
a magazine journalism major. It was like literally it was like one of the only universities in the country that had a major that was specifically called magazine journalism. And I was like kind of an odd kid in that I just always knew exactly what I wanted. I worked at my high school newspaper. I became the editor of the high school newspaper. I like very much type A overachiever, knew exactly what I wanted to do and like knew the steps that I needed to take to get there. And, I didn't always know all the time, but I was like resourceful in figuring it out. And yeah, I think that's different than a lot of people who your path was so right. Your path was so different. And it's like the irony is that like we both ended up here in the same spot, but like came in through totally different ways.
Yeah. And I think that's so interesting to hear you say, I knew people were not, maybe they weren't mean to your face about it, but they were not nice about it behind
you. You can feel the vibes.
Oh, you can always feel. And it's like, I always think, because I was on social media for 2 years before anybody who knew me. And so the people in my life are maybe not quite close friends, but friends of friends. You go to a party and you tell people what you do. And it's just, that moment
that's
of
fun hobby. Cool. And so what do you do for money? Like, you know, people don't, and you know, I think there are still people who have that attitude, but definitely now more than when I left my job, it's like more accepted as a career. And I think people do realize that it is an industry and a growing billion-dollar industry. And it is something that people should take seriously.
So was there anything you told yourself? Because I think so many people stop themselves from doing what we do or even starting because they can't get over that fear of embarrassment to the people they know. I almost think it's easier. I think the most supportive people in the beginning are the people who don't know you, which is the oddest thing. It's the people who know you that you feel the most judgment and criticism from. Mm-hmm. And I heard this amazing TikTok the other day about why your haters are sometimes the people who know you the best and came from the same place as you. It's because people, like, they look at you now and they can't fathom coming from the same place and not being where you are. But you took that risk and you are where you are now. So what advice would you have for people who are looking to start, who just are like, I just can't imagine going to my mother-in-law and saying, I'm trying to be an influencer?
Yeah, I think, God, I think back to like when I told my parents what I wanted to do. And I just remember, I think like they said, well, what are we going to tell our friends that you do for a job? Or like, will we just tell them you're unemployed? Like, I don't know. It was a very kind of weird response. But I think I had initially put the idea in their head that it was something I was thinking about. And then I spent like 9 months like sprinkling in little tips, like little, oh, this brand reached out and wants to work with me. Do you know that like this influencer makes this much money per post? Or just like trying to convey the legitimacy of it. And they definitely were nervous because I think I come from a very traditional, like, parents, like, work like education, medical field, like very traditional. And to them, the idea that a person like working for themselves or working on social media is like a very foreign concept. But it didn't take them long, honestly, to like really double down and like totally support me and, get really, and now that my dad, they're both on TikTok, like they don't post, but, they're like, sharing my stuff on Facebook. And I know that they're very proud, but I think it took like a little bit for them to wrap their heads around the idea.
Well, I stalked your dad's Insta, and he's a founding member of the Silb Squad.
Yes.
You started a Facebook group back when, you are like an OG creator when Facebook groups were still very much a thing. And I think that's so cool. And I think probably, because I know my parents said this about me, obviously they had a little less faith, I think, in me than probably your parents did in you, because at least you were somewhat in the field. But my dad always said, I never knew what the hell you were really doing in New York, but I knew it was going to be okay because I knew you wanted to do something. And I feel like your parents watching you grow up and being so focused, even as a 14-year-old, were probably like, we have no idea what this is, but she's going to figure it out.
And I just remember saying to them, like, when have I ever given you any indication that I would like fuck it up? Like, just trust me. I've never like, I just guess I was just always had my head on straight and knew that what I wanted.
Was that always the thing? So when did you decide you wanted to go into journalism and magazines? Like, did you open a Marie Claire one day at 10 and was like, I want to be the person who writes that?
Honestly, I think that I remember this. I'm like aging myself depending on how old your listeners are, but do you remember those like Tiger Beat and like Teen Bop and like there's those magazines from when you were kids, or like Jonathan Taylor Thomas from Full House had a spread, or like all of those young heartthrobs. So those were the first magazines. I had my walls like plastered with them when I was a kid. And then
I think of those as like the limited two of magazines, which again, I'm aging myself too.
Or Delia's. Remember Delia's
catalogs? Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah.
That's like it's almost like the pre-Teen Vogue.
Yeah. Exactly.
Magazines.
So I guess I was always fascinated by magazines, and there was a friend of my mom's who worked in the industry, and I remember just being really intrigued by her and her telling me what she did all day, and I was probably 10, and I just thought it was the coolest thing, and I stayed in touch with her a little bit over the years, and as it came time to apply to college and what colleges, and I would ask her opinion, and I kind of knew for a really long time. But it's so interesting now that like I saw my life in a very clear direction as to what I would end up doing or what I would become. And like the direction I'm in now is a complete 180 from that. And I also think that is like, okay, I think for some people, they see their lives going in a very specific path. And if it doesn't end up that way, like it doesn't mean anything, it doesn't mean bad or good. It's just different. And I think like learning to accept that and that it's not a bad thing is okay.
Did you know that when you graduated college, you obviously had a very, very clear idea of what you wanted to do, which I think, again, is rare at 22, as we said. But did you feel like at the time you had a grasp on your life, or were you kind of like, this is what I want, but like I'm still kind of out here soul searching?
Yeah. I was just out of college. I graduated in like the worst possible time for getting a job. It was like the financial crisis and no one was hiring. And I was like, well, I just like spent 4 years working at all these internships and like, getting coffee for everyone and doing all the grunt work and delivering the mail and whatever. And which I did deliver the mail at like every internship I had, which it's a tip I can share later. But I was like, great, now who's going to hire me as an assistant? My first entry-level job, and there legitimately were no jobs at the time. So I took an internship that was, I think, unpaid. And then I had side hustles. I was like bartending. I was cocktail waitressing. I was like doing whatever I had to do to like make enough money to live in an apartment in New York, because that's what I had always dreamed of. And it wasn't glamorous at all. It was like not at all what I expected. But I also just knew like I had to like put in the work and the time. And I felt like if I did that, I would get there.
That's wild. I didn't realize you had a side hustle to what, I would consider your main job. And you think, okay, well, you graduate and at least you could get an entry-level job in this field. But
no, I was working at GQ like Monday through Thursday. And then I was like serving beer to drunk idiots in the West Village like Friday.
What bar did you work at?
It doesn't exist anymore. It was called West Third Common. It was a fun place. I made a lot of good friends there. Gave away a lot of free drinks. So it was a fun time.
It was a good and it paid for your rent in New York.
Yeah, it did.
And you had roommates back then?
2 roommates. It was a 2-bedroom that we turned into a 3-bedroom. I had the bedroom with the fake wall. It was like, it was a closet essentially, but that's.
I never talked to anyone that ever had the real bedroom. Like, who are these people with I lived my first apartment.
The ones whose parents were paying for it.
Fair.
I mean, I didn't have a closet in my room. I didn't have a light switch in my room. The light switch, because I was in the living room, the light switch that controlled the light in my room was just the living room. So people would come in, I would be like sleeping, and someone would turn on the light, and it would be like the middle of the night, and I would be like wide awake because, the light switch wasn't in my room. I mean, just like classic New York stuff.
Crazy stuff that I think people still do because it's just so expensive, and it's actually only gotten worse. But I remember I didn't have a closet either, so I put my bed on those risers that you used to get from Bed Bath & Beyond, and like every single square inch was utilized.
But I loved it. Like, I feel like those are the best years of my life. So much fun.
You truly don't realize how freeing it was. Like, I look back and I had so much anxiety about my 20s, but like it was actually a really freeing time because it's very freeing to have nothing and to be like, wherever I go from here is going to be better.
Yeah.
Because
you can only go up. Yeah.
You can only go up. I can't get to a more fake bedroom than where I am right now.
Yeah.
And so
I remember the first bedroom I got that that had a light switch inside the room, I was like, wow, I have made it. Like, this is peak luxury.
That's the pinnacle. Or I think for people who've never lived in New York City, they don't understand the luxury of having laundry, A, in your building, which is the first step, and then B, in unit, which I actually never got to. I feel like COVID cut my New York City, like Sex and the City life short, because my husband and I always talk about, like, we only lived in like the shitty apartment together. We never got to live in like the corner apartment with the nice light. Yeah. But I remember when I first graduated to like a building with a doorman and laundry in the building. It's
like, wow.
I thought it was incredible. But even though I was still in the fake bedroom, at least I didn't have to haul my laundry
down the street to the dry cleaner or the laundromat.
Doesn't it just remind you of how soft you've gotten? I've gotten so soft.
Oh my God, yeah. It's like, but I think that I love that we had that experience. I think I can't imagine moving straight into like a real fancy place. Like, I think you appreciate those things so much more when you had when you were crammed into a 500 square foot apartment with 3 people.
No, and I see people who grew up where money was no object, and then people like us where money was never really a part of the picture until it was. And I think on some level, it just makes you realize, hey, this came from somewhere. And I know I appreciate it a lot more. That's not to say you can't grow up privileged and appreciate nice things, but there is that dichotomy of this is where I came from. And every now and then I feel like I have to keep myself in check.
Oh, yeah.
When I'm on a trip and I'm like, do I like this pillow? Yeah. And I'm like, oh, God, you know what? What were you sleeping on 10 years ago?
Well, I think that to me seems like a reflection of your parents and like probably mine too. I think my parents, like, they humble me. Like, I just feel like I will never get to, have too much of an ego or be too confident in myself or whatever, because I think they, really bring me back down to earth all the time.
But they're also pretty self-made, I guess.
Yeah.
In a way. And what's your background for people who don't know you?
So I grew up in New Jersey. My mom was a stay-at-home mom for most of my life and then went back into work. Actually, when I was like 16, she started working with children with autism. So she's like truly an angel on earth. My dad is a doctor and grew up like, pretty normal nuclear family, mom, dad, brother. And I think, we were comfortable, but my parents were definitely of the mindset of like, you will work for every penny. Like they gave me things, but nothing was like handed to me. I had a job like from the minute I was legal to have a job. I worked like all through college. And so I think that was just something that they were big on, is just like never making me feel spoiled and having me know that like I really had to work for everything.
What was your first job?
I worked at a shoe store.
Oh.
It was like our local shoe store in town, and I still could like use, that like sliding shoe foot measure thing, those like those like metal. So it actually was kind of a good plug because it was at the time when Uggs were really hot, and the shoe store had
just reminds you how long Uggs have been in the narrative, because they're still they're a thing again.
This is when like the first wave of Ugg pandemonium started, and the shoe store that I worked at like would get the first like early access to the Ugg. So actually it was like in the beginning I was like, oh, what a shitty job. I have to like put shoes on people all day. But it was like, actually no, because I have first crack at all the good Uggs. So I would like work and then spend my money on the Uggs.
Would you get a discount?
Yeah.
Of course.
Not a good one, but it was like worth it. And they sometimes give me free shoes, which is cool.
That is, especially as how old are you, 16?
Yeah, I was like 15 at the time. I loved it. It was just like, it was like made me feel like such an adult going to work every day. And I like that.
Right. And I think that's kind of where your work ethic comes from, is that you were never really handed anything. But it's nice to hear that you weren't. A lot of times I feel like you either have the dichotomy of people who are like, yeah, I had a horrible life growing up, and then, I just didn't really have parents and figured it out. You had a very nice upbringing and by like normal suburban standards. But I think as a result, your parents were like, look, this could go either way.
Yeah.
So she needs to figure out how to stand on her own.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to switch gears a little. You're married and you met your husband in college, which I don't want to blast out how old you are, but it's been a while since you've been in
We did meet in college. I mean, Although it's like when you say college, we didn't actually meet on campus. We did meet on spring break.
Still very college.
Yeah, right, exactly. We met in Mexico at a club on spring break. So, if you're listening and you're single and you just think like, God, there's nowhere that I'm going to meet someone, you may meet someone in the most unexpected place. That is because a club in Mexico is about the last place I would have ever expected to meet my future husband.
And he's 2 years ahead of you,
Yeah.
right? And what was the premise of the spring break? Was it all a bunch of Syracuse kids all went to the same place and that's how it was like everybody knew everybody? Or did you just happen? Because there's no like school sanctioned spring break.
Yeah.
In fact, I think that would be terrible.
I think there was honestly just like hundreds of college kids that all happened to be in Mexico. And we didn't have, maybe we had some mutual friends, but we didn't really know each other. And we weren't there like as a group together. We just happened to meet at the club. He just hit on me at the club.
Do you remember what his first line to you was?
Well, I just remember we were sitting in like one of those like banquettes at the table and there was one open seat next to me and the whole rest of the place was packed. And I think he like saw me, saw the seat and immediately made a beeline and just like cozied up next to me. And I think he asked me if I wanted to dance or something, which is so weird. I feel like now—
You gotta give him a break. He was 22
yeah,
or something.
Of course. I mean, I guess that's like what you do, what you would do.
Yeah.
So we like went down to the dance floor. So cheesy. And, the rest was history. We thought it would be a one-night stand. It was not. That was like 16 years ago or something. So
that is wild. I think that's also a perfect example of like if it's not the right person or if it's not the right time.
Yeah.
It can still be the right person. Because
it was
the completely wrong
time. Everything about that time was wrong. He was about to graduate. He was on spring break. I was like, oh, are there other girls that you want to hook up with that are here? Like, why are you calling me again? And it made no sense. I still had 2 more years left of college. We were so young. It just like everything about it did not make any sense. I tried as hard as I possibly could to like not be in a relationship with him, but he was very persistent. And I think he knew probably before I did that like we had something special and that, it didn't make any sense. But it was worth a shot because otherwise, we wouldn't have known what we were missing.
I mean, it's kind of rare for a boy at 22.
Yeah.
That's what I feel like.
It was very mature. Like
it is.
Yeah.
But what was it? Does he ever tell you, like, what was it about you that he was like, this is probably it?
I think that I was a little bit of a snarky, like, gave him a hard time. I kind of was like, played a little hard to get. Like he was definitely interested in me. And I think he could not, I was interested in him, but I didn't show it. And he always says like, he couldn't tell for the first like month whether I like fucking hated him or whether I thought he was amazing. Like I just kind of kept him guessing. And I think that's probably what made him like me.
That's hilarious. Not that that's advice that people should take dating.
Yeah, no, that was probably terrible advice. And I'm sure a lot of guys would have been like, okay, cool, she's not interested, let's move on. But like he, I don't know, he reacted well toward it, I guess.
It was like every other girl wanted me too much.
Well, honestly, that's kind of what it was. I think he was used to getting pretty much any girl that he wanted. And I was like, oh, I was take it or leave it. And I think that like really kind of intrigued him.
Were you actually take it or leave it? Or were you like, I've got to play it cool?
It was a little bit of both. It was kind of like I said, such terrible timing. I was like, when am I going to start dating a guy who it's a long distance relationship? I still have 2 more years left of college. I want to party and like be a fun college girl. And he's going to be like all serious in his like serious job in New York. And, it made no sense, but we really like had a connection. And so we just said, let's do it.
So when did you decide this is it? We're boyfriend, girlfriend. We're going to give this a real go, even though we're long distance now.
So it was like a month after we got back from spring break and then stayed together for 2 years after we started dating. So he was living in New York and he would like come visit me at college and like have to stay in my sorority house when he was, an adult sort of living in New York.
Did you at least have a double bed?
I must have. I don't know. It was honestly, it was not ideal. And, but we did it for 2 years and then I graduated and we kind of like had made it to the point of being in person. And then I had this kind of freak out and I was like, oh my God, this is too serious. Like I'm too young. Like I actually did think I was going to marry him one day, but I just couldn't have imagined myself as like being in such a serious relationship so young. So I freaked out and I said, I think we need to like take a break, and I don't know how long it's going to be, maybe just a few months, but like I need a minute to find myself or whatever I said. And then that actually ended up being 3 years of being apart, and then we got back together like 3 years later.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Did you date other people in between that
Yeah, we
time?
both dated other people, and we didn't like talk about it. Even to this day, we like don't talk about it. It was like the period that like we don't speak of, but I do think, and he probably won't admit this, but I do think we both needed that time to really like, I don't know, like form ourselves. You're so young in your early 20s. And I really just can't imagine not having had those 3 years of like doing my own thing and dating people and having fun and being single with my girlfriends. And so that for me was like a really formative time. And I think he would say, well, he probably wouldn't say, but I believe it was a formative time for him too.
Well, because it doesn't really sound like it was his choice. It sounds like it was yours.
It was my choice, yes. But I think I think we're still together because of that period.
And I think the difference is because so many people ask me, should I go back to my ex? And most of the time the answer is no.
Yeah.
But I think the difference is you were both so young. Mm-hmm. And I think the people who don't date around, and a lot of people end up divorced.
Yeah.
Because they're like, I married my high school sweetheart, my college sweetheart, and I didn't know what I wanted. And I think it's almost better that you guys left and was like, we saw what was out there and it was not good.
Well, it's also, like you said, knowing what you wanted. I didn't know because I just didn't know what else was out there. I knew that I really liked him, but I was like, what means of comparison do I have? Like other losers from college or high school? Like, I really feel like I gained a newfound appreciation for him when I was dating other people.
Because my guess is nobody got even close.
Oh, yeah.
To what
I would say I would go on like one date and the person would annoy me. They'd do something weird, or I'd go on a second date and they would do like one weird thing and I was like totally had the ick, really turned off. And I would always go back to like, well, Matt never really did anything to annoy me. Like he's like, I don't know. He just had all the qualities that like I was maybe looking for in other people, and I had it right in front of me all along.
You had the gold standard of the man right out the gate, which is, you were so lucky.
Yeah.
I think when you first told me that story over dinner, I was like, I absolutely hate you, because I wanted to be that girl so badly that like met her match in college and just didn't have to deal with it. But then you were like, no, we broke up for 3 years.
Yeah, and it was, it was drama. Like it was not easy. There was like periods where I was like, oh my God, I fucked up. And then he didn't want to talk to me. And then I didn't want to talk to him. And then he was still talking to my family. It was like not a clean break. Like I like found out that he was still in like a fantasy football league with my dad, and they were secretly talking on the phone.
Are you serious?
Yes. I heard my dad in the back bedroom, like on a secret like call. And I went to the bathroom and I heard my now husband and ex-boyfriend's voice. And I was like, are you talking to my ex-boyfriend? And they just were so close that he was like, sorry, we're still in the league together. Like it was.
Wait, that's actually hilarious.
Yeah. And I was like trying to, like move on and have a separation. And my parents were not ready to move on. They very much wanted to still be talking to him and hanging out with him.
He's like hiding in the bathroom because he's like, this guy's so cool. If given the choice between you or my daughter, I choose you.
No, my parents were like furious. They were like, I can't believe you would do that to us. Like they were so upset.
That's almost how you know you have a good guy, when your parents are not on your side, because it's in their nature, I feel like, to always be like, he was the asshole. And they were like, no, Lindsay.
Yeah, I feel like they like did not. They were like, we can't support this decision, but like, I guess you do what you have to do.
They're like, we still love you because we have to.
We have to because we gave birth to you.
That's wild. So what did the process of getting back together look like after that not clean break? Because you're both in your early 20s. I can't imagine you knew how to handle it in the most. I don't even know how you handle breakups maturely in your 30s. I feel like it's never that clean. But how do you get back together after that?
Well, honestly, I like put my tail between my legs and like totally like came crawling back. He had said that you take your time, and like when you think that you're ready, like I'll be here. And I actually just didn't know how long that offer stood for. I was like, is that like a year? Is it 2 years? I didn't know 3 years in if the offer would still stand. So I just like reached out to him and I said, if you're still single and open to getting back together, I think I'm ready now. And thank God he was still single and didn't hate me. And we got back together like that day.
And he was like, yep, this is what I've been waiting for.
Yeah,
it was so. He didn't like make you grovel or anything.
I mean, no, like, even to this day, I'll still like hang it over my head. Like, oh, remember when you dumped me like for 3 years? And, but like, to his credit, like he was not like petty about it. He like wasn't bitter. I think he was just like happy that like we were back together.
I feel like some people are just born mature, and Matt just feels like he was just born self-assured and mature, because so many men, I think, and women, I mean, it would be really tough for me to have somebody leave me for 3 years.
Oh, are you kidding? If the roles were reversed, forget it.
No. And I think about, because I've had a couple exes come back to me and I'm like, no, you thought you could do better and you couldn't. So goodbye.
I truly like give him so much credit for not doing that, because I'm sure, he might have been tempted, or if it were me, I would have been tempted.
Yeah. Like, prove yourself.
Yeah.
Where are you taking me shopping?
Right. Exactly.
Did you know when you went back to him, like, he's the one and I really have to make it work? Or were you like, hey, let's give this a second go? And then, like, at what moment did you realize this is it?
It was a little bit of both, honestly. I think I knew, but I still also was hesitant, because I kind of was the type like that I never wanted to be like tied down, and I felt like it was the time and I was like ready to grow up, but there was still like parts of me that I was like, oh, it was so much more fun, like running around, being single with my girlfriends, and I have to like be serious and like in a relationship. And I kind of felt like I always had this like independence, and I thought that like, oh, if I got into a relationship, then that meant that all of that independence would be gone. But I have to say, like, that's not necessarily true. And we still, like, even now, we still live our own lives. And I still went out and had fun with my girlfriends. And just because I was like in a relationship and some of them weren't, didn't mean that I was like not fun to hang out with anymore. And I think that's one thing that him and I like respect with one another, is like totally can do our own things, have our own lives, like, go out, do whatever, and know that we're going to come back to each other. But I think that was a really important aspect for me. I didn't want to be like suffocated.
But I think that's the mark of a healthy relationship, is that it's not codependent. You know, when people are in toxic relationships, it's like, oh my God, I feel like if he's doing something without me, it's because it's not so much the idea of him doing something without you or you doing something without him. It's the idea of like, I think a lot of women know, like, he'd rather be hanging out with his buddies than me. And that's when people get nervous.
Right. No, I feel like that's like, I mean, it's easier said than done, but my feeling is like, please go do your thing. Like, cause I want to do mine. And then, it's more fun when we hang out together, cause we're not hanging out together all the time. We like each have our own lives. So
yeah. And the right relationship makes you more of who you are, not less of it.
Yeah.
And speaking of something that you are not somebody that knows whether she wants kids. And it sounds like maybe you're leaning more towards no.
Yeah.
What stage of life did that epiphany occur to you? I think it's still pretty rare these days, even though it's happening more and more often. Yeah. But I think a lot of women, I know I have very conflicted feelings about having children, even though I want them. And so it's really interesting to talk to somebody like you who's decided this is probably not going to happen.
Yeah. So, growing up, like when I'm 36, 37, I don't know how old I am anymore.
Doesn't matter.
No, I feel like once you get like, it's,
once you get past 30, you're like, whatever.
Right. When I was in my 20s, I certainly never thought about having kids. It was not on my radar at all. I remember then I started to get into like my later 20s, and I kept thinking like, some of my friends started to have kids, and I kept being like, okay, like wonder when that's going to start like seeming appealing to me. And I actually have a blog post about it. If anyone listening is sort of like feels conflicted or doesn't have like that like natural born like maternal instinct, I really wrote all about how confusing that has been to me, that like I just don't really feel like I'm maternal, and I've never pictured myself being a mom. And I think that that's been confusing for me to like grapple with, because I feel like a lot of my friends, or most of my friends, like have always pictured their lives with children, and I just have never have. And I remember, and I wrote this in my blog post, but I remember asking my mom, like when I got into my like late 20s, like, when did you did you just like wake up one day? And then I remember her saying, yeah, when I was your age, like in my 20s, I also wasn't sure about kids. And then like, one day you just wake up and like you feel differently.
Oh my gosh. And I'm waiting for that.
I've been waiting for that day for 37 years and it hasn't happened.
Somebody told me, they're like, oh, something shifts in you when you're 30 or 31. And I'm like, I'm going to be 34 in October and I don't know when that shift is coming. But and it's not I'm more sure than you are about, but it's like, I don't feel maternal. Like it's not, and you look at those women, because we both have those friends who are like, the baby doll when I was a baby,
or just like always pictured like their, family and like how they would raise their kids and what that would look like. And it's just like, I don't know. It just I felt so weird that I just haven't felt that way. And I felt like I was the only person who felt that way. And then I wrote this blog post that like sort of went viral and started getting like hundreds of messages from people in my DMs and the comments of the post being like, oh, wait, I feel that same way. I thought I was the only one. And so that was really comforting to just know that like I was not the only person who feels that way, and a lot of people do. But anyway, my mom told me that she suddenly like had a shift and she started to think about having kids, and that would happen to me. And I would say like every year on my birthday I would wake up or whatever and be like, okay, 29 is this year, like 30 is now it's going to be the year. Like, do I feel it? Can I picture it?
With Matt, so it's like you had a partner that you could picture it with,
and like it's just like still not, year after year. And then eventually I decided to freeze my eggs because I was like, well, like, I'm not getting any younger and I'm definitely not feeling any more inclined to have them yet. So like, I might as well just like try to take matters into my own hands and do that now so that like I could have the decision, or at least have maybe an easier time if I decide much later in life.
Is that a decision that you and Matt made together, and how does he feel about it? Because again, you met so young, so you're not really talking about kids typically in college.
Yeah. We certainly, I mean, truthfully, we had never even, it sounds so bizarre, we had never even had a conversation about kids or how many we wanted or what we wanted our family.
That's probably a good indicator of the fact that kids are not important to either of you.
I only realized it after I brought up the egg freezing thing, and I was like, oh my God, we've never talked about whether we want kids, which is probably an indicator that neither of us like cared very much because it wasn't not on either of our radar. And then I had brought it up to him, and I also kind of explained like when you're a woman and like you have a biological clock, and that's why like if we decide in 5 or 10 years from now, like from the time, like we may not have the option. And he was kind of like, okay, whatever. Like he was neither here nor there, but he was like, if this is what you want to do, like I'll support you. But he's kind of the same exact way as me, just sort of like take it or leave it with kids. Like, I don't know, just not super passionate about the idea, I would say.
So where are you now? Are you kind of like, you've got a ton going on. I can't even imagine you fitting in a pregnancy and then motherhood right now. But are you leaning more towards no? Or is it more like hey, since I have frozen my eggs and we have all this technology available, like it could be something in 10 years where I have a kid at 45?
Yeah, I think that, we actually froze embryos. So not that it matters, or people who do both. But I think doing that actually like was such a weight off my shoulders, and like it took I think leading up to that, like it was just like constantly on my mind, like, oh my God, am I wasting time? Like, what if I change my mind? Am I even fertile? Am I going to be like so upset that all my friends have kids, and by the time I have one, like their kids are going to be in college, or like it was constant. Like, when am I going to feel this way? And I think the second I just did the embryo freezing, I was like, all of that noise kind of went away. And I was kind of like, okay, well, I did the thing that you're supposed to do that hopefully, could increase my chances. And now I can just like not think about it for a while. And that's not to say that like if, let's say I'm 40 and I decide, it's not necessarily a guarantee, but I think it just like took a little bit of the pressure off, I guess, knowing that like there could be an option if I decide down the road.
Right. It's like, it's there for me. And then was your process with IVF and freezing embryos fairly painless and easy? Because I've had girlfriends go through that process and they're like, we got one viable embryo.
Yeah, I think I was not naive. Like I knew I did it when I was like maybe 34. I probably should have done it when I was like 28 because I was pretty sure then that nothing would change. But I was like, maybe I would think like, oh, maybe by the time I'm 34.
I think that's a problem. And I'm almost 34 and I haven't done it because I was like, oh, at 28, you're like,
Right.
I'll feel differently. The switch will turn on.
And so I probably should have just done it when I was younger because I probably knew deep down then. But, you just don't know what you don't know. And I don't even remember what the process was.
A fairly painless process?
So, I would say that like I had talked to a lot of some people who did it, and there were some women who were like, oh my God, I got 1 million eggs. And then other people who had a really hard time. Mine was somewhere in between. I mean, I don't think, I always say, one thing I learned about doing that process is like talking to people about numbers can be like really triggering. And so I was like that was something I learned about watching other people's stories and women who were messaging me that like, I would say I was not like the most fertile, but we do have some options, but I think that was like a big learning curve for me, knowing that like it's really triggering to a lot of people to talk about that, especially women who've gone through like multiple rounds. So I tried to like keep quiet about just like the technicalities of it, but I did one round. They'd recommended that I do another round or another 2, and I just couldn't. Like I was just spent. Honestly, women who go through multiple rounds of IVF, like truly like warriors, because by the time it was over, I was like, I can't do it again. And maybe it's because I just was so on the wishy-washy anyway. Maybe I felt differently if I like was dying for a child.
No, I've heard IVF is awful. I've had girlfriends go through it and get pregnant because that was the end goal, not just for a later date. And they've told me that the process of going through IVF is actually worse than the pregnancy. They were like, the pregnancy was like fine. They were like, oh,
mine wasn't actually so bad. The retrieval wasn't great, but like I have to say it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. It's also just like exorbitantly expensive. And
were you on health insurance? Sometimes your work will cover it, but were you not?
No, I was working for myself. Like the meds alone are just insane. I did thankfully get to work with a facility that gave me a discount, but like even the discount was like, I mean, a ridiculous amount of money. And it is like a privilege to even be able to do that. And I think if people who are thinking about it, like there are a lot of opportunities for people to like try to get their employers to pay for it. Even if it's not offered, it is something you can like ask your HR about. And that's what I would have done if I was still employed in my corporate
Actually
life.
Would have made a lot more sense to do
stick
it at
around.
20.
I know. It has someone else pay for it. God.
And just have it on ice forever. Because
Totally.
then I think the storage fees are much less the initial up front.
We actually just got the bill the other day, and Matt's like, we just got the bill for our children on ice. Like, do they have our credit card? Or am I paying that? Or I'm like, I think they have it on file. We'll be fine.
It's just like a month. It's like your cable bill, your storage.
It did go up. I do think I noticed it went up, and I was like, that is criminal. Like, what are they going to do? Could they raise it every year? And then like, what's your alternative? You can't be like, no thanks. Like,
just melt.
Yeah, I don't know. I could swear it went up, and I was really pissed about that.
That makes sense though, because it's inflation. Everything it's you're renting space, so it's like your New York City apartment goes up in rent.
Exactly.
So do your
embryos.
How many did you get? Can I ask? Are you okay? Or
honestly, 3. Although I would say like we didn't have them tested, and so like
tested for what? For those of us who are
how viable?
okay.
Like whether they would be like, I don't know, viable. But essentially you can do that before or you can do that after, like before you implant them. And like, because I wasn't planning on like using them anytime soon, I was like, I'll just wait until if and when I decide to try it.
Okay, so you have 3 shots.
Yeah.
I've had a girlfriend get pregnant off of 1 round of IVF where she got 1 embryo.
That's incredible luck.
And she had
That's
a
amazing.
baby who's going to be 2 soon, which is insane. How have your parents reacted to you being very iffy about kids?
Yeah, I honestly, it like really breaks my heart because like the one thing I don't really think about myself, like I just feel like I think about my parents because I know they would be like such amazing grandparents, and I'm sure it's like upsetting to them, but to their credit, they really do not say much to me about it. I think because they know how vocal I've been, and like I have not like been shy about talking about how I feel. I don't think there's any like room for discussion, let's say. I think for sure when I was younger, like I don't know, like any parents, they're probably like, oh, we love, grandkids, but they don't really bring it up anymore just because what is there to really say? But I would literally like consider having a child just to like give my parents grandchildren, even if I don't want kids. Like that.
Do you ever feel like your parents would be better grandparents than you as a parent? I feel that all the time.
100%. I was like, I think my mom was like, oh, I would raise the kids for you. Like they just would be amazing. And I feel like I've robbed them of that. But it's also like, at a certain point you need to be like selfish. And I'm like,
well, it's your life, and I'm sure they know that too.
Yeah, they do.
And it's, again, it doesn't sound like it's a total no. It's just a no for now. Yeah. Do you have siblings?
I have a younger brother,
A brother. Okay. Is he in a relationship, married?
He's single, but he like, I feel like he's like their only hope because
at least they have another.
Right. Well, and also he like loves kids and like totally wants to be a dad. Okay. And like, I think that he will be much more of a likely chance than me.
And how old is he?
He's 34.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So he'll figure it out if he wants them. See, I'm an only child, and so like the bloodline ends with
you've got a little bit more pressure.
I know. And so, and Dave and I feel very similarly about kids, where we're both really into our careers and our freedom. And there's just so much, people say nothing changes when you get married, which I truly feel like nothing changes except I have his health insurance now, which is awesome.
Yeah.
But everything changes when you have kids, And so that is a consideration. Well, okay, so you don't have any human children.
No.
But your business, you probably would say, is your baby at this point.
Yeah, that is, obviously I can't compare what it's like to have a human child, but having a business with my husband is quite literally like having a baby. We started our business in 2020. So we own a candle brand called Hotel Lobby Candle, and they're luxury scents that are inspired by 5-star hotels and destinations. And I call myself a candle snob. I've been a candle snob my entire life. I've always loved like beautiful scents and really high-end luxury candles. And I also love to travel. And a lot of my career prior to becoming a content creator was traveling around the world and writing about travel and hotels. So I always found that the hotel smelled amazing, and I always wanted my apartment. I would come home and be like, oh, I wish my apartment could have a signature scent and just like have the vibe of those hotel lobbies. And it was an idea I'd had in the back of my mind for like years and years and years, but never did anything with it until COVID happened. And I was like, well, I'm not traveling as much. My life is like way less crazy because we were home, and I needed like something to do with my like time and energy. And so I thought like, well, maybe now's the time to launch this business.
So the idea sort of came to you.
Yeah.
It wasn't so much you were like, oh, I have always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I've always wanted to have a product. You were just like, this is just the one idea that I've always been sort of gravitated towards.
I definitely like, especially as I built my audience as an influencer, I did think a lot about starting a product and a brand, and I wanted to create something that like could exist outside of me and like not rely necessarily on like me as the face of it. What that was, I had many different ideas, but kept coming back to the candle brand. And, especially during COVID when everyone is missing travel and you really kind of needed like little micro joys in your home, like things that would just like make you feel calm and zen. It just felt like the right time. And so I certainly never set out to be an entrepreneur. I now think that I'm built for it. But if you would have asked me like a few years ago, I would have said, oh, I could never do that. I'm not entrepreneurial. I don't have that mindset. I'm the type that needs to work for other people. I need that structure. Like, I don't think I'm the entrepreneur type. And now I think I am.
That's great. I mean, you proved to yourself. But so what does day one look like, though, of Hotel Lobby? Are you literally just like buying wax off of eBay and figuring it out? So
interestingly, I knew I had the vision for the brand and the branding and like packaging and all of that like before I had the product. So thankfully, like also very 2020, I found an amazing designer on TikTok. Shout out to Michelle. And we worked together. I told her my idea. I kind of gave her the vision and what I wanted. And she like totally brought it to life in terms of like the packaging and design. And then simultaneously, I was reaching out to manufacturers all over the US and just like educating myself on the different types of wax and wicks and packaging and fragrance. And I got turned down by every possible one. It was like, obviously it was the pandemic and businesses were struggling and there were like supply chain issues, and also like people, when you're small and you're just starting out, and we bootstrapped. So I started with my own money. I didn't have any like venture funding or anything. We didn't have the money to make like 1 million candles. And a lot of these bigger manufacturers will say, oh, well, we won't even like talk to you. Good luck finding someone who will talk to you if you're making less than like 5 or 10,000 candles. Right. And like, I just didn't know. I didn't have a proof of concept enough to even
You're like, I don't know if I'm going to sell 50 candles, right, let alone 5,000.
I had no idea. So finally, I did find one person who kind of took a chance on me and was willing to work with me to produce our first 2 scents. And it all happened. It felt long at the time, but like in reality, it was kind of a quick whirlwind process, and like started early in COVID and then launched in October of 2020.
Are they still the same manufacturer you use today?
We've expanded and now we have multiple because we've kind of outgrown the single one. But yeah, we still work with that same manufacturer. And there's been like, so many iterations of like we're expanding into new categories and using different people for that. But it's definitely been a crazy ride for sure.
It feels like it's been around forever, but it hasn't, because you started in 2020. And I feel like for those of us who like really, really lived through the pandemic and like weren't in school or were, old enough, it's like 2020 feels like yesterday, but it also been 4 years, like forever ago. Yeah. How did you make yourself stand out in the beginning? Because like by the time you entered the candle game, I mean, it was and it is still a very, very saturated market. But I think I read that your first launch sold out in like 24 minutes. Yeah. How? Did you leverage your social media platforms?
Yeah. So when we launched, like the initial launch was literally only on social. I mean, we had a website obviously, but I only promoted it through social. I honestly, like up until the last week that we launched, I didn't even know if the products were going to see the light of day. I had like all these issues last minute and I couldn't get the exact packaging and boxes I wanted. And then we had a different manufacturer that like totally screwed us over. It was just kind of a mess up until like about a week before. So I had not posted anything. Like I didn't even post on Instagram to say that, oh, by the way, like over the next few months, I'm going to be building this brand. I was like superstitious about it. I just didn't want to seem like a failure at like one of these people who was like, oh yeah, I'm like launching this business and then it never happens. Right. So I didn't want to say anything about it until it was like, we had the product, we knew like it was a sure thing. And so I honestly think about a week before the launch date, I posted on my Instagram stories and I said, I've been doing something for the past like 8 months that I have not talked to anyone about. I've not even, only like 2 of my friends know, like only my family knew. And I just kind of walked people through like what had been going on for the past 8 months in developing the brand. People were really excited about it. But of course I just like had no idea what the reaction was going to be until our launch day.
You'd never done any like market studies or anything.
Nothing. I mean, I literally was just going based on instinct, like they were 2 scents that I felt strongly about. The packaging I thought was good. Like really the only people who'd ever smelled the candles were like me and Matt. And I just felt really confident in what we had. And I also felt like people who trusted my recommendations for other things, for beauty, for travel, I think they knew, or my followers know, that I'm like a very like perfectionist, like will not put my name on something unless it is like the best of the best. And so I think they knew that I would bring that to a product. And so people obviously bought blind. I mean, no one had smelled them, but we sold out in 24 minutes. And initially that was just all from me leveraging Instagram. I had planned on like sending out PR packages and doing all this stuff, and none of that ended up happening because
you didn't have any left.
We had none. We literally had none left.
How many candles did you start it with?
I think it was like 3,000.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
You sold 3,000 candles.
It was crazy.
24 minutes.
And like I've said this before, but we like, we started in October and we bought that inventory, and I thought, okay, well, I'll just have until, if I could sell through them through the holiday season, like October, November, December, great for gifting, 3 months, I could definitely, hopefully get through that number. And then it was like gone in 24 minutes, which is wild and just totally blew me away.
So what did you do after that? Were you immediately on the phone like, I need another 30,000?
The manufacturer, and I was like, how quickly can we get another, and then a month later we restocked, and then that restock sold out in like 2 hours. And then it sort of was like, and at that point too, it wasn't just like me posting about it. It was like everyone had posted about, they were sharing on their Instagram, and we had started to get some press coverage, and it started to kind of like really take off. And I think that was a point when my husband actually left his job to run the business with me full time.
Which is actually so interesting because he had a very legitimate career prior to being, their Insta boyfriend / candle making, side bitch. Sorry. But,
no, actually, he thank God for him. He actually keeps our whole business afloat, because I'm just like a total creative, and I love the pretty things and have all the ideas, and I want all the inspiration, but the best decision I could have ever made is to have him leave his job and come work with me, and I give him credit, because I was very against it. I was like, I want you to have your job, I want me to have mine, I want us to have our own lives, and one of us is in this crazy, chaotic, kind of unstable situation, and he always had the more stable, normal job. And I was like, we both can't, what happens if it all comes crashing down? We both can't take the risk. And he really felt like it was worth taking the risk. And thank God.
That's incredible, and that's so scary, because I think that's what I always take comfort in is my husband has a very normal job.
Can you imagine if Dave would work with you, or you started something? It's
oh my God,
terrifying.
I can't.
And he
also health insurance. I'm
right. Oh,
I'm I know such a hypochondriac. I'm always at the doctor.
No, I know.
And you see those bills as to if this was out of pocket, it would have been a $4,000 10-minute visit. You know.
Yeah.
So you guys pay for your own health insurance.
We not only pay for our own, but we pay for our employees too. So now we're we have a team now, and we pay for their health insurance, and we so he worked in finance for many years out of college, and then had a big career shift and ended up moving into the fashion industry, and did that for 7 years, and then never in his wildest dreams would have thought he'd be a candle entrepreneur, but here he is, and he's totally thriving, and we're a great balance, because he's really strong in the areas that I'm not, and vice versa.
I didn't realize he had a career in fashion prior to candles. So he is at least artistically somewhat inclined.
He was in sales, so in wholesale. So he also brings that element to the business. We're in Neiman Marcus and some other retailers, and I would have had no clue how any of that worked. And so thankfully he brings that experience for sure.
I mean, speaking of that, I read on your stories a couple weeks ago. I love this series because it's I look at you now and I'm like, oh, well, hotel lobby's established. You're not struggling anymore, but it's always an uphill battle because you recently got into Kolinscombe.
Yeah.
Which is a department store in Texas, and you walked your followers through that journey and the process. And I was like, this is insane. And it honestly was so inspirational to me because I always get so sensitive about when people aren't responding to me. It's oh, well, you know what? They don't want me. They don't. And you were basically I'm just going to keep following up. Can you walk us through that whole process?
I think it's funny because people assume, oh, you're an influencer and you have a big brand. And I'm sure you could just get into any store you want, and that's
my gosh, by the way, I think most influencer brands fail.
I mean, there are not very many influencer brands when you walk into a Nordstrom or a Neiman's. So I had identified this store that I really had my heart set on it. I heard amazing things about it, and Texas is a huge market for us, and so it's this fabulous store in Houston. And so I just decided to put it out on my Instagram account. Does anyone know anyone who knows anyone who might know someone who works there? And thankfully, a lot of people kind of reached out, and someone's like, oh, I don't know someone, but I live nearby and I'll just pop in there tomorrow and mention. People were so kind and so willing.
Squad, follow through.
Honestly, my people really ride. It's incredible. And so I did have one follower who made a connection to me to someone there, and I was like, oh, great. great. Her intro was great. Like, you know, I was like, oh, how could you say no to this? Like, she totally sold me. Then I followed up and sold myself. And I said, well, I'm going to be in Houston. I can totally stop by. Would love to meet with you.
Were you going to be in Houston or no?
I actually was. Well, we were going to be in Dallas, but I was planning on maybe adding Houston to the trip if there were a reason to. But I also just wanted to, you know, make it known that I would be there and they wouldn't have to do any work and no scheduling.
Be cool. It's like your strategy with Matt. Just be casual.
Yeah. So I followed up. I spent all night working on this like big pitch deck and like crickets. And then I think I followed up again and then like crickets again. And I was kind of like, okay, this sucks. Like I had this whole big vision of like going to the store and doing a sales presentation. And then I think I tried one last time and I was like, hey, just as a reminder, I'm going to be in Houston. I also was like, we'll be we sell in Neiman's and we're doing a training there. So I thought, you know, maybe that would work. Like I was like, I don't know what will get these people's attention. I said, I'm just going to drop by the store and drop off some candles and hopefully like someone will be there to receive them. And then they finally wrote back and said, oh, sorry, like your email got lost and we're busy. Yeah, like we've been busy, but yeah, happy to meet you. So I was like, yes. So we go in. We have the meeting. It was like kind of one of the first times that I really had to pitch the brand in front of buyers. And the story was so intimidating. They literally have like every single luxury brand of candle you can imagine. I was like, we are going to get eaten alive in here. Like, I don't even know if we want to be in here. It's like, we are just totally out of our league. But we pitched it and they really liked the brand and they ended up placing their first PO, their first purchase order, and it's been doing really well there. So we got in, but it took time. Like it took like months of like trying to make connections and following up and then just showing up and dropping them off and following up then. And so I think that it's just like a lesson of persistence and also not having an ego. Like I very much could have been like, oh, well, fuck them. They're not writing back to me. Right. Like I have a big audience. Like they don't know what they're missing, but like I don't have an ego and I knew that, you know, this was something I wanted and I wasn't offended. I know people are busy and
it's not personal.
Yeah,
and
it's not personal.
I think that's what I realized. It's like, you know, nothing in anything in this business is personal. People are just like overwhelmed.
Oh yeah,
you know?
We've been told. I mean, we've had retailers, people are like, oh wow, it's so amazing. You know, Neiman Marcus, you're in all these stores. I'm like, well, that is amazing, but we've also been told by other retailers that are awesome, like, oh, it's not a fit. Oh, we don't have room for you on the shelf or whatever. You know, it's like not everything is perfect and not everything for everyone.
Yeah, because we don't see you're never going on Instagram being like, we didn't get in this retailer. Congrats to us.
You know, and that's the other thing too. I think like people, they obviously don't see the full picture and often people are like, oh, you should share more behind the scenes. And I guess it's like I struggle sometimes with being a business owner and it's like, how much do you like actually share? And, you know, you don't want to share like too much because, you know, it's just like, obviously you need to keep up appearances of the brand and you don't seeing the messiness of a brand that is, you know, that is not always like the perception. So I try to show bits and pieces here and there, like that story, obviously, like it was not, I could have just been like, oh yeah, we got picked up by this fabulous store, you know.
And I just waltzed in.
I just waltzed in and they like were banging down our door. But I felt like I would rather show what it's actually like and it's actually like a grind.
But I think that's why your followers love you for who you are because you're so honest. And again, you know, you don't have to go through the day-to-day grind, but it is nice. Like, at least for me, I'm like, oh, wait, that's so inspirational because so many of us, myself included, probably would have stopped after that first pitch deck went unanswered. It's like, well, I'm not going to bother them anymore. And it's like, no, you know what? You have a brand, you believe in it, just keep going until I come from a real estate background and I had somebody tell me, like, keep following up until they basically tell you to fuck off.
Like, right. Okay. So you definitely, of course, real estate, you know exactly what it's like.
But it is. You have to, I mean, my God, your pride and your ego, like it is not even in the same like hemisphere, let alone the room with you when you do that because you're like, it's not about me.
Yeah.
I want to touch on this because you got hit by a car in 2018.
Yeah.
And, you know, you've always been focused before then, but how much of you just being like 2 years later, like, I'm just going to go for it. It's COVID. I've already, you know, escaped death once.
Yeah.
How much of hotel lobby candle came from you just realizing now or never, or not at all?
I think a lot of the decisions that I've made like after that situation definitely were affected by like my like a mindset shift of being like, okay, you know what? I got a second lease on life. Like what's the worst that could happen? And so, yeah, I was like in New York and I was crossing the street and got hit by a car, like as a pedestrian, like not in a car accident, like actually a car hit me. And the woman had run through a red light and it was like raining and dark out. Anyway, I got rushed to the hospital. I ended up 2 years later having that back surgery and like years of physical therapy. And I, for sure, like that night and that whole instance, like definitely changed my perspective on life. And I obviously, like any person, get caught up in like the minutia and I get anxiety and stress about like such stupid things. But like I always go back to remembering like, well, it could have turned out really different for me and I'm perfectly fine and I'm, healthy and able-bodied and, I sometimes still have back pain, but like that's nothing compared to like what could have been. So I think that I keep that with me. Like that's something that for sure has shaped me and my view of life.
I read your blog post detailing this car accident, which, for those of you who want to know the nitty-gritty details of it, you should go read her blog post because it's insane, because you were just coming back from a dinner and...
No, it's like literally could happen to anyone and actually has happened to so many people, especially in New York. It's like really freakishly common, which is scary.
It is horrifying, but I think that thing you said that stuck out to me was... I remember you were saying, why me afterwards? Because it does feel so unfair, right? And sometimes the randomness of bad luck in life feels so unfair. But I think your whole message from it afterwards was you were like, it could have been a lot worse. Like, I could not be here, literally. And I think what's so inspiring about that story is that you still get to play this game. You could have been taken out of the game and you're like, okay, basically I have anxieties about the minutia of life. Maybe a manufacturer messes up like a wick or whatever, and then you're like, but I still get to play, which is just such an inspiring message for all of us. Because again, it's like, I don't think about death on a daily basis, but I'm like, okay, literally the worst that could happen is like, I don't get to try anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think also it like stripped down a lot of the need to be perfect or show my perfect life. I think I definitely was one of those people who before like to have this appearance of having everything together. And I think that moment and like that whole experience sort of taught me like, okay, this is real life. And like, there is no reason that I should just pretend that everything is great and like normal all the time because it's not, especially when that happened. I remember like I was in the hospital and I think this is like so delusional now thinking about it, but I think I was just like posting a beautiful travel photo of like me like on a beach somewhere, like when I was like, no, literally like in a neck brace, like after I'd had like my surgery. And it was like, some like caption, like I had never shared anything that had gone on with me on Instagram. And I remember my dad being like, that's so weird. Like, why are you doing that? Why wouldn't you just like post about like what's actually happening? And I was like, oh my God, I would never. It's like, so, oh my God, hospital. Like, why would I want anyone to know?
So unaesthetic.
Yeah. Like, I don't want anyone to feel bad for me. And like, I don't want people to like think differently of me. And I just remember him being like, well, like, this is what's really happening in your life. Like, why wouldn't you just post like what's real? And I was like, shit, that's so true. So I think like that day was the first, I think I posted like in like a picture of, I don't know, my gown or something. And I like wrote about what had happened and how I hadn't like talked about it.
Your outfit of the day.
Yeah. I did a try on haul in my like scrubs.
Front facing versus back facing. Awesome.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that was a little bit of an awakening. That was sort of like, okay, yeah, it does not have to be like perfect and polished and whatever all the time. Like, a lot of the times people will respect you a lot more if you're just real.
And I think that's the thing is like I've had followed you for a long time prior to meeting you in real life. And if you just look at you from first glance, obviously you're sharing, the pretty parts of life. And the thing that I loved about getting to know you was that I was like, oh, it takes effort for her to get here. Because I think so many of us and people who aren't influencers like look and they're like, oh my God, everything's so effortless. It's so easy. Like you just have like all these followers. And I think when I met you and realized, oh, like she struggles too, like the rest of us, and like she looks great, but like it took her, she didn't just wake up like this. I think that's like why I love following you even more. And your stories are kind of like where it gets real too.
Yeah.
And so, you know, in a way, I'm sure that's what has endeared your audience to you after all these years, because you've been at it for a long time in the grand scheme of how, you know, young this business has been.
Yeah, for sure.
So I want to end on this question. I really believe that success and rejection are two sides of the same coin. And we've touched on that in your career, obviously. I think the people that find success are the ones who've been able to accept rejection and kind of use it to fuel them rather than stop them. Mm-hmm. Is there one rejection in your life, whether it was a relationship or a business rejection, that really kind of stuck out to you and was like the turning point in your life?
Yeah, I mean, there's been so many. I'm primarily thinking about professionally, but you know, I talked a lot about my career and how I really like did everything right. I went to the right school. I interned at Vogue. I interned at every magazine, you know, the resume, everything. I knew that I was good on interviews. I knew that like I had the ideas. I knew I was the right fit. And there were several jobs that I was like in the running for. I was like one of two people left, and I was like sure that I had it. Like there was no reason. I knew I was the best person for the job, and I like didn't get the job. And obviously that was like devastating. Like I just remember thinking like this was my dream. My whole world is over. Like there will never be a job that comes that's anything like this. Like I was crushed. And it was always, that has happened to me multiple times. And it was always shortly after that like the real opportunity, like the better opportunity that I didn't even know existed happened. So I feel like I mentor some girls who are younger, and, you know, if they are facing a rejection, I always say, like, as cheesy as it sounds, like this door is closing because the better door is opening soon. And like, you maybe don't know it now, but like in a year from now or 6 months from now, you're going to call me and you're going to be like, you were so right. I was devastated, but I shouldn't have been, because the next better thing was like just waiting in the wings. And, I think when you get rejected by something, it really just is leaving opportunity for the next right thing to come along.
That's great. So inspirational. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So where can people find you?
So my Instagram handle is at Lindsay Silb with a B, and my brand is Hotel Abbey Candle. We are sold at hotelabbeycandle.com as well as Neiman Marcus.
Thank you so much for being here, Lindsay.
Thank you.